Welcome, everybody, to the Weekend Program, your weekendly destination for all things TV, streaming, scripted, and otherwise of interest to myself and my co-host. You are in the attic of RHAP alongside me, Josh Wigler. Hi, hello, as well as my co-host. He is sometimes in some circles known as the great Antonio in the Sky. I know him as AC Mazzaro with two Z's and one R, the great Antonio Mazzaro. Welcome back to RHAP, baby.
Feels so good to be back. It hasn't changed one bit, and I love what you've done to the attic here, Josh.
Well, I can't take all the credit for the attic. Rob kind of did just shove us up here.
It's
But
fine. I
I've
belong here.
I've installed I didn't I hired a guy to install the AC.
Oh,
His
well,
name
I'm
was
the AC.
his name was Antonio. He's
Yeah,
bringing
perfect.
You're going to be bringing the heat, but for the sake of our physical lives in the attic, Antonio, you are bringing the cold winds.
Yeah, kind of an HVAC in that
You're
way.
sort of an HVAC Mazzaro here on the weekend
HVAC
program.
Mazzaro, that's
Oh
me.
my gosh. Really excited to be here. Weekend program. This is the last stop on your weekly tour through a week of programming here on RHAP. We Know Scripted TV. I have been pitching this as a TV hangout. This is your hangout spot. You've arrived, Antonio. Just
That's your
imagine this if you
destination.
can.
Yeah.
You've arrived at Saturday morning. Look, you did it. You got one of those M through F, 9 through 5s. You did it. And if you didn't, then we're here with you wherever else it is that you are right now. You know, not everyone is on that M through F 9 to 5, Antonio.
How do you feel about the R for Thursday? You feel okay about that?
I feel okay.
Yeah.
It's
Can't be a
fine.
T, right? You can't do T and T. You can't do Tuesday and Thursday. You got to have something different.
You got to have something different. TNT is reserved for something totally different, but you've arrived at Saturday morning. You have
You made
arrived
it.
at that moment where now you're like, okay, I've got some time. I don't know what to do. You know what you need to do? You need to check into the weekend program. The weekend program is going to be that TV hangout podcast where Antonio and I, each and every week, are going to be diving into all sorts of different TV topics, trends, news, theories about the state of television. I would say, Antonio, we may even test a hypothesis or two here on the weekend program on We Know Scripted TV. And I'm thrilled about it. I'm very excited about it to have a weekly appointment with all of the RHAP listeners, as well as with you, Antonio, my podcasting partner in crime of a decade at this point.
Yes, we are not going to be recapping shows in the post period after they have aired, although we may be doing some of that. It will not be our primary
No
animus
post-show
here.
recaps,
No
Antonio?
post-show recaps. How about
Aw.
pre-show recaps or post-show precaps? Or I don't know. We're going to be talking about everything TV,
We're
not just
just
individual
talking.
episodes. We're just
We're just
talking.
two guys
We're
talking.
just hanging out in the attic. Pull up a
That's it.
chair.
Pull up a chair, pull up a beanbag, come with us in
Pull up
the
an
attic.
HVAC. Yeah.
We're gonna have a lot of fun talking through things here. So of course we want to make sure first and foremost you know where to go to never miss an episode of the weekend program here on the RHAP We Know Scripted TV feed. Just go to robhasawebsite.com/scripted. It's got all of the subscriber info that you could possibly need. Rate and review early on, greatly appreciated as we are trying to rise through the charts, as we are rising from the ashes of 2 months of hiatus in the real
This
time.
podcast is Phoenix. Is that what
This
you're
is
saying?
We're phoenixing up, not
Better than
phoenixing down
Scottsdale.
here.
Yeah, better
Yeah.
than Scottsdale. Kevin Finnerty territory either way.
Is that where Kevin Finnerty winds up? Is Scottsdale?
I think this it's like Scottsdale is nearby. He is definitely in Arizona.
Is Scottsdale hell?
I mean, that's certainly the implication in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay,
Not
well,
to get too deep on our Sopranos late season analysis here.
we'll write that down for a future episode
Certainly my interpretation. There are fires in the distance.
of
Yeah.
the program. No, but wherever you get your podcast, rising the charts, really helpful if you can rate and review. So once again, it's robhasawebsite.com/scripted in order to do that. So Antonio, as we're setting this thing up, I think that this is going to be an ever-changing podcast where we're going to have all kinds of different conversations. Today's podcast is not going to look like next week's podcast, is not going to look like the week after that. You
That's
and
the best
I,
part.
I love a shifting target. I think it's going to be really, really fun. It's going to open us up to a lot of different things that we could talk about when it comes to the grand history of TV, which I know is something we at least want to like stab at today.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's not going to be the post show recap format where you and I, over the course of our podcast lives, have chewed on every single minutia, every little bit of story thread on so many different shows back in the post show recaps era, which is the podcast that predates We Know Scripted TV and predates the weekend program. But I do have so much nostalgia for all of that, Antonio, because it is where you and I started our journey together. So why don't we give people just like a quick little overview of who we are, what we've done, if not what we plan on doing.
Sure. Longtime listeners to RHAP will remember, or perhaps they won't. Was this, Josh, the fall of 2014? Am I getting this right? The final season of Breaking Bad? It was
That
either
would be
2014 or
2013, fall
2013.
2013, more than 10
2013.
years ago now.
More
Yeah.
than 10 years ago, Rob and I podcasted about the final season of Breaking Bad here at Rob Has a Podcast. You've all heard this story a million times, or if you haven't, this is what happened. Rob had wanted to talk about scripted TV and had previously been talking a lot of reality TV here at RHAP. And so we did. We talked about Breaking Bad. It sounded like it went pretty well. It went well enough that you and Rob got into business for yourselves as well, Josh. And pretty soon, Post Show Recaps was born.
Post Show Recaps was born. It was an idea. It was an idea that started around the idea of talking through dramatic TV, funny TV, scripted TV with the same fervor that the reality shows get talked about all across RHAP. And the results of it were so many different podcasts across the years, including many that Antonio and I presided over, watching a lot of different shows that spanned from 2014 through our final year of 2024 on post show recaps. You and I, Antonio, covered shows like The Leftovers, of course, Ted Lasso, Mr. Robot, Better Call Saul, The Sinner season 2, the The Strain season 1,
Justified City
Strigoi,
Primeval.
just to get that in there, some Justified as well. And our way through was like comb over every single nook and cranny, and we wouldn't be able to do it any other way. We're very granular when we get our heads together, Antonio, talking about TV. And as you and I were starting to talk about the possibilities of, okay, we're gonna do this again. Just when they thought I was out, they pulled me back into the podcasting game. But it's not as interesting to us to do an episode by episode The Boys recap or whatever, you know. It
Cursed.
will it may be interesting for some of you out there listening, but less interesting for Antonio and I. And I think what we're interested in more now is like looking at this medium and this industry and this moment in our human history that has been spanning at least a century at this point and longer, I'm sure, when you go deeper and deeper into the roots of the arts. Our canvas, Antonio, is no smaller a thing than TV itself here on the weekend program.
Yes. I mean, the truth is, and our great producer, Jess Sterling, points out that September 29th, 2013 was our finale podcast for Big Brother here at RHAP. Myself and Stephen Fishback, Josh, covered the finale because Rob was out attending to the birth of his first child.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how long we've been in business here, over a decade. But that means that I'm 10 years older than I was at that time. And I like to think that I'm at least 5 years wiser, maybe a full 10. I don't know. But in that time, I really have developed a lot of evolved opinions. I feel differently about things. And I remember is the key thing. I remember. I remember TV in the early 2000s. I remember TV in the 1990s. I remember TV in the 2010s. And I certainly know what it's like now. And this curse of memory is also partially a curse of like obsession for history, the history of pop culture and the history of our culture generally. And so what I don't remember, I've really sought out and tried to learn about, experience, take in, understand in context, the social elements of why shows were made at a certain time or how things were covered or the way the medium has evolved and changed. I mean, this goes back for me to college. I don't know about you. We've talked about this a little bit, but my college study, my degree is in communication, but my focus is on radio, TV, and film. So I am legitimately obsessed in this area with the history of our pop culture and the development of TV as a medium, and in turn where it is now and the places it can go as a reflection of all of that. So this is in my blood. It's something that is very important to
Is
me.
it in the blood?
It's in the blood. I had to see a doctor for it.
Yeah.
It was really bad. He said my blood type was NBC. It's
Yeah.
messed up, man. It was really messed
Yeah.
up.
I found
I
30
thought you were gonna
rocks in my bladder. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
earlier you said we were gonna do theories, and I said, "I hope he's not gonna tell me the NBC Peacock isn't real, because 'cause I'm not here for that."
Well, not on this episode. That's a little too early for such a dramatic reveal.
But anyway, we're television obsessives, you and me both. And that's sort of my perspective and where I come from on it. My dad was a film and TV obsessive as well. My mother was, obsessed with the first season of the Star Trek, the original series, and the TV from that era forward. So it has always been not in the kind of dream on way where they sat me in front of the TV and I was raised by TV, but I think we're going to talk about it today some. I know it's going to play a part in a lot of what we talk about. Whether or not you realize that you're influenced by TV, you are influenced by the way that TV permeates our culture, but that in turn reflects the culture, this TV. So it's sort of a thing where one influences the other and one influences the other. And it's fascinating to think about. What is your background, though? I mean, you went to Syracuse. What was your field
Yeah.
of study and how much did you get into the TV side of this?
It took me a long time before I was, I was never academically tied to what ended up being my chosen profession. I kind of fell ass backwards into the mail room at Wizard Magazine. For anyone who remembers Wizard Magazine, 1990s comic book news
Well, thank
medium.
God.
If you were a comic book person in the 90s, chances are very good that you were reading Wizard with interviews with all these comics creators, and Toy Fair was one of the spin-offs. And I grew up reading that stuff because at that point I was already a TV obsessive. I was a TV obsessive from Connor Roy was interested in politics at a young age. Antonio, I was interested in TV at a young age as well.
That's good.
Uh,
Much
you know,
healthier.
I was sat in front, and I think like my first memories of TV. I know that this is going to be something that we'll talk about a little bit later in this episode too. My first memory of live TV is very different from my first memories of TV, and my first memories of TV are being sat down watching The Wizard of Oz on repeat with my grandmother. My memories of TV aren't sitting down and watching the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, but the impact of the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, running around my house, changing from my Superman pajamas into like a trench coat because I thought that's what journalists wore to be Clark Kent,
It
which
is. It
explains
is.
why I'm always wearing a trench coat.
Yeah. There's only certain
Uh,
kinds of journalists, but you need that like press hat if you've got that, right?
Yep, yeah, you
Need
need
that,
like the
yeah.
index card that says
Right.
reporter.
Yes,
So
exactly.
the impact of TV was felt for me right away. And as a kid growing up in the 90s and then in the early 2000s, for me, I was so obsessed with sort of like the late 90s, early 2000s boom of internet sites, fan sites, reporting on the news, reporting on this. So I came by that very honestly. And out of college, after being an English and psychology major, I ended up falling into the Wizard mailroom, which began this ridiculous roller coaster of a career for myself that has spanned 17 years as an entertainment journalist. At this point, I believe is the number. Multiple years in the trenches at MTV News, still in the trenches at the Hollywood Reporter, where I've been writing for almost a decade now, and the 10-year run of post show recaps, and getting to stand vigil over what really now, especially on the other side of post show recaps, feels like an era, like a bygone era. And I think to be able to demarcate that and talk about the era that we're in now, where we're back once again, I feel like in this moment of active history is happening. The medium is shifting in ways that we think that we can predict, but we really can't predict. But as many stories often indicate to us, Antonio, past is prologue, and digging deeper into the archives, I think, can be illuminating towards a view of the future. So I come by this honestly as a kid who loved all of this stuff and somehow, some way convinced, tricked the gods above to give me a job talking about this stuff.
Well, and you mentioned how the past is prologue, and there obviously in our lifetimes and in the last 20 or 30 years, there have been significant TV moments, some of which we'll talk about collectively, individually, societally, etc. But TV has always sort of reflected in the way that like a funhouse mirror does, distorting the reality, showing what it is, but maybe showing it in a different way or played up way. But it's fascinating when you go back and look at the history of TV. And we, as part of like what's next, when we were wrapping down post show recaps, or wrapping up, I guess, depending on the direction that you wanted to go. Well, I guess we wrapped up because we headed to the attic. When we were doing that, we were talking about like what's
Perhaps.
next, and we started talking about like, what are the things that interest us? And one of the things I pulled out of the ether was that on September 11th, 1928, the first television drama was broadcast. The first ever scripted television broadcast occurred September 11th, 1928, by a broadcast station in Schenectady, New York, upstate New York, right there at the
Not
beginning of
supposed to talk
all of
about
this.
that, but here we go.
Fair enough. And it was called The Queen's Messenger. You can look this up. You can look up The Queen's Messenger and you can read about it. But one of the things I want to tell you is, okay, so if you're thinking like it's 1928, they're writing a script, or they're using an existing play, they're going to modify it. What do they think is going to play to the audience to whom they're going to broadcast this first ever television show? Well, let me read you the plot of The Queen's Messenger. And you tell me if you think this sounds in any
Okay.
way resonant to our modern discourse. A British diplomat has a romantic encounter with a mysterious Russian woman who is secretly trying to obtain secret papers he is carrying in his dispatch case for the Queen. The old spy melodrama was selected because it had just two actors and they could alternatively select the three television cameras between them and the scene props. So it's a very basic presentation, but it's about a British diplomat, a Russian woman, and secretly trying to obtain some kind of espionage material. This sounds like it could have been made in
So
2022.
the first show ever aired was The Americans?
The first show ever aired was The Americans.
Yeah.
Yes, Elizabeth is involved here. And this is just like the first show ever aired was a segment from The Americans.
No,
Yeah.
it's incredible because you are like you're to the point, Antonio, that I'm actually shocked that the Queen's Messenger HBO miniseries doesn't exist, or some version of that with the
Yeah.
whole everything is old is new again. We're
We're putting a
constantly look.
circle with the R around this one because this is ours. Nobody else can make
Yeah.
this now. We spoke it into being.
Now, Antonio is a lawyer. Antonio, can you lock that down?
Oh, yeah. It's locked, baby.
Can you lock that
I'm
down?
not a lawyer in this area, so you
Could
might be
you?
getting a little Dr. Nick like
Yeah, we.
delivery here.
Hi, everybody.
Yes.
So no,
Or
no, but I
Lionel
think
Hutz, I guess, would be
I
the
think
case.
to your to hey, I think to your point. I don't know why I did that for Lionel. I think to the point of the Queen's Messenger, though. I think like yeah, like there has been this draw is old, right? You know, the sensibilities of now. I don't think you have to dig too far back to see that they were just wearing a different coat of paint once upon a time.
Right. And so are we as a people, right? Like we are not terribly miles away far, unfortunately, in many cases, from the same people we were 100 years ago. And that bears out in any number of ways that are upsetting, terrifying. And the ways we are different, of course, are encouraging in most instances. But we do see a lot of the same things happening over and over and over and over again. So it only makes sense that our TV of that era, and in fact, the first TV, is TV that would slide just perfectly into the kind of TV that we would see made now, that would be greenlit now, and the kind of stories that people would find interesting. Of course, you could probably draw distinctions and come up with shows from the 20s that are entirely different than what we would enjoy now. And that's interesting too, to draw those distinctions. But it's fascinating to think about how similar this is, what that must have been like, the decisions to have this be the one, the discussions of why people would like it, and so forth and so on. Is art imitating life? Is life imitating art? I don't know. But when you go back and you say, what's the first ever scripted TV show? It's The Queen's Messenger, and it's about Russian espionage and what sounds to be like a complicated honeypot type scenario. And I'm here for that. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about some early memories and some early moments in our life that brought us to now, Antonio. I would love to, from time to time here on this podcast, check in on specific moments in history, and we'd like to do that this week with a segment we're calling "This Week in TV." We want to examine a notable event in TV history and use that as a way to kind of thread some of these conversations we're having right now. Because Antonio, I had to hear this a lot from my friends in New York, who were really obsessive Knicks and Rangers fans. Uh, and
Bing
so
bong.
and so this year, my Knicks and Rangers fan friends were saying, it's all happening again. 1994, the Knicks had the team, and we are the New York Knicks. We're playing, and like it's happening again. 1994, Rangers win the Stanley Cup. It's happening again, and then they both just got taken out back and shot. The fans lost. No Knicks victories, no Rangers victories. It's not all
You
happening
sound
all over
happy about
again,
this.
Antonio. Yeah,
Yeah,
mostly for the Rangers fan.
I was gonna
But
say.
with no shade towards the Rangers themselves, it's more about the fans. Not if you're a fan. It's more about these two specific fans that I'm talking about right now at this moment
This
in
is
time.
there's no couch. This is not therapy, so we're gonna
There's no
we're gonna
catch, it's not
pass on
therapy.
that for the moment.
But
But
we're
it's
talking
fascinating
about
that you mentioned that.
June of
Yes.
2024, and in the same way, and this was part of it. They're like, things are happening again now that happened 30 years ago. And
Yeah.
one of the things that was cited so much by those sports fans was this week in TV history, Antonio.
Tonight on Larry King Live, an American tragedy. O.J. Simpson vanishes after being charged for a crime his fans never dreamed he could commit. Now, live from Washington, here's Larry King.
Unbelievably, the most watched, most wondered about man in America has gone missing tonight. He apparently disappeared from under the noses of his lawyers and doctors this afternoon, dodged an arranged surrender, and vanished into the Los Angeles haze. O.J. Simpson, one of our most public figures even before this week's incredible events, is now one of our most wanted ever. The football star, movie star, TV sports analyst, commercial pitchman is described as armed and dangerous, possibly suicidal, and if found, he could face the death penalty for the murders of Nicole Simpson and Ronald Goldman. In a note he wrote before he fled, Simpson denied any responsibility for his ex-wife's murder, insisted they had a great relationship. There is nothing like this in memory. Nothing.
Nothing, Antonio, like June 17th, 1994, which we are just up against 30 years greater, as we say on a different podcast on RHAP. The O.J. Simpson chase, which would lead into the trial. And for me, the aforementioned first live TV moment that I can remember in my life, Antonio, and one that I know that you've been thinking about a ton lately in the weeks following O.J. Simpson's death.
Definitely. So what you remember as your first live TV moment is the Bronco chase?
What I remember specifically is further along. It's the verdict,
Ah,
and I'm a fifth grader, and
were you smarter than you?
no,
Okay,
no,
fair enough.
no, never been. And so I was brought alongside the rest of my class to the fifth grade classroom next door, and they showed the TV screen of the verdict to all the and like it didn't really totally resonate yet, other than this feeling of Miss Balaban's pretty hardcore. Like, I don't know why she's bringing us all in here, like, away from our studies. Like, this must be a big deal. So that is the first, like, sort of like a thunder striking event has happened. I did not watch the chase live, Antonio.
Fair enough. I did because my brother and I were watching the aforementioned New York Knicks, Houston Rockets, NBA Finals Game 5. I think it was Game 5. I think the series was tied 2 games apiece. It was a big deal. We were basketball fans. We wanted to watch the NBA Finals. And this like low speed, high stakes chase, I guess you could call it, breaks out on LA's famous freeways. Every number mentioned here. And we see, of course, everything that we saw in 1965 with KTLA's coverage of the Watts riots. When these LA helicopters get up there in the sky, they can bring us fascinating TV moments. Of course, this whole thing, the whole OJ trial, takes place only 2 years after the Rodney King verdict itself. A massive moment because that was captured on tape, of course. That was a big thing that was captured on videotape. The trial was arranged so that it worked out exactly how the police and prosecutors would have intended. We know there were riots after that in LA, and then the OJ situation happens. And LA can't shake that. It is impossible to look at the OJ situation and not consider what had happened in Los Angeles in the preceding years. But of course, across the country, we may not necessarily be thinking of it in that way. We're watching the NBA Finals. We're watching the World Cup. We're watching the last hurrah of Arnold Palmer at his last big golf tournament, or we're watching the Rangers ticker
Well,
tape
what a
parade. Like,
legacy he left behind. Heck of a drink.
that's what I'm drinking at this very moment,
Of
actually.
course.
A little from Trader Joe's. They don't put his name on it. Like, they don't do the Paul Newman thing where you could put like Arnold Palmer's name and face on it. They have like an old-timey guy on it, but we know the
Well, did
scores
he
in
ever?
Trader
I
Joe's.
mean, he didn't really Paul Newmanify the thing, did he?
No, he probably could or should.
He should have.
There is a product with his face on it, I believe. We are really getting off
We're
track
far
here,
afield.
but listen, there's
Saturday morning. What are you gonna do? We're in the attic.
yeah, there's apparently half tea, half lemonade in the attic. So who knew? But it's impossible not to think of the trial without thinking of those other things about Los Angeles. But like I said, of course, across the country, we're not thinking that. We're all going about our lives. But in the 24-hour news cycle, in the world that we lived in at that time, this immediately became the story. It became not like it's one of many stories. Like, this was the thing. Of course, the trial subsequently has cameras in the courtroom. It's in LA. It touches on all these like lurid or popular areas like true crime and celebrity, and it's extremely violent. And there's this whole LA aspect to it. So it's just kind of a fascinating moment in our history. And if you really look at it, I think it begets everything that we're dealing with now as far as the reality TV era, as far as reality TV stars as influence, as people who are like at the center of our culture. We had a reality TV president already. We're probably going to have a content creator president at some point. Like, we are headed in this direction. And for me, like, a major inflection point is the OJ chase and subsequent OJ trial. That chase was crazy. If you don't remember it, like I said, you're just sitting around watching something else. And of course, you had heard in the previous days that OJ's wife and an acquaintance of hers, Ronald Goldman, and Nicole Brown Simpson, were killed. We don't know if OJ is involved as a society if we're following this story. And then it starts to break that, yes, it's looking like OJ is a suspect. Oh, they've issued an arrest warrant for him. Oh, he's on the run. Oh, our helicopter found him, and we're going to follow him throughout LA. And it became like the thing. Everybody turned it on. People were like running out into the streets in Los Angeles,
Sure.
overpasses, watching the chase happen in real time.
It's in my mind's eye, of course, the white Bronco, the OJ video, that kind of like plays on a loop in my mind. I think like if you've seen it, if you lived through it, certainly, yeah, I do think it's stuck with you, to say the least.
Yeah, and like I said, it takes place in this world that was sort of ripe for this kind of thing to really fill the country's desire and need for this sort of ongoing 24-hour reality show, ultimately, which is what it was. The participants in the trial all became reality stars to the point that like jurors who were booted off the jury, who didn't even make it all the way through, were able to write books about the damn thing. Like, there's been a lot of books written about it from small to large players in the case. People all told their own version of it. The spin on it was real. There was a level of celebrity that was truly hard to describe for the people that were involved in this trial. It went on for a very long time. And then, of course, the verdict is this like very memorable moment, not just in the life of a young Josh Wigler, but for anybody who
I had pizza
witnessed
that day.
You ate pizza that day. So that's what you really remember.
It's a guess.
You're just guessing? You mean like at
Good
home or
guess.
at school?
It's a
At
good
home or at
guess.
school? What kind of
It's a good
school
guess.
pizza were you dealing with there in fifth grade?
Same as y'all were.
Really?
Yeah, probably.
So like the rectangle one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever
Yeah.
have the Mexican pizza? It
Yeah.
was like the stop shines? Okay, man. This
Yeah.
is good stuff here.
And it was all good stuff. Yeah.
I know. Have you ever had it since? I had heard tell you could like buy it from school systems. If you
No,
wanted
but
to,
I mean, like, I don't think like an Elios is too far away. So when I get my Elios moments, our producer, the great Jessica Mulch Sterling, Jess, bringing you in real quick. Chef's kiss to the Elios, Jess.
I still buy Ilios pizza.
see, there it is.
Yeah.
I knew
Yeah.
you could.
Yeah. We all are buying Elios pizza still out here in Antonio.
I've not bought Elio, so I'm gonna have to get in on this. I'm gonna have to get in on
This
this.
podcast
But
not brought to you by Elios, but we will have Elios in the attic next week.
It's definitely something I would have smashed in 1994, and it sounds like something I would now. But the OJ trial in 1994, and really the OJ chase, it was insane. Like I said, there's been multiple programs made about this thing. There's a 30 for 30 at ESPN just called like June 17th, 1994, which is about all the crazy sports things that I ran down very quickly there that were happening on that day. Of course, there's been the Ryan Murphyization of the history of the moment, which is, of course, in and of itself, an interesting thing to talk about because that show is based on a Jeffrey Toobin book. And the Jeffrey Toobin book is, as anyone would guess, I mean, it's seemingly well researched, well sourced. But what happens on that show for a lot of people will end up being the historic record. It will end up being like what they believe to be true about the case and about the people that were involved in the case. This TV show will make people who didn't sit there and form an opinion about Marcia Clark in 1994 feel some type of way about Marcia Clark based on what Sarah Paulson did in the
Yeah.
TV show. So it's crazy to think about the Ryan Murphyization of that. We could do a whole episode in the attic up here about
Oh,
that sort of
sure,
thing.
but like so many different industries just emerging from this moment in time specifically. And Ryan Murphy is an industry of unto himself at this point. By the time that he is making an American Crime Story, but it's his first spin-off away from American Horror Story, The People versus O.J. Simpson, and it was probably not the hardest sell at FX where the show aired and where Murphy was set up for a long time on a couple of different fronts. One, American Horror Story is killing it, but two, American Crime Story, not only catchy title that fits alongside American Horror Story, but American stories can be horrifying as well. And I think like there is this American tendency to we're so trained to keep eyes on the wreck, right? Like eyes on the wreck, can't look away. And I think how much of that is TV trained is a question that I have. And I think a lot of that comes from this more of the Kardashians
Yes. Yeah.
as an institution, probably in a very serious way, spring forward from all of this.
Yeah, Ryan
Um,
Murphy's show really makes a point. Like the toxic sludge that was the OJ trial, the cameras in the courtroom, the celebrity aspect of it, how a domestic violence murder, ultimately two murders, but certainly one that was the product of an ongoing domestic violence situation, becomes essentially like the subject that people are talking about around the water cooler or at the breakfast table, or that they're listening to medical forensic testimony on, or looking at pictures on TV about, or they're keyed in. We've always had a lust for this sort of whatever you want to call it. You want to call it pulpy. You want to call that an LA kind of pulp story. We as a society and as humanity, and certainly in the modern era of America, have lusted after this information, but we are obsessed as a nation and as a culture with true crime right now. And there's just no way that we end up the way that we are, as obsessed in the ways that we are, if TV hadn't fed us the OJ trial in the way that it did. Because it does give birth to, like, it gives wings to small networks like Court TV, or things that lead to things like Investigation Discovery, or all the true crime stuff that's popular on YouTube now, or podcasts like Mr. Ballin, who are out there just delivering content that's regularly in the top 10 as far as subscribers go on podcasts, YouTube, whatever it is. True crime is white hot, and it just this really did give rise to a lot of that. You mentioned the Kardashians, of course. Robert Kardashian, the scion of the family, was an acquaintance of OJ's, and became sort of a member of the legal team, memorably portrayed by David Schwimmer on The People versus OJ. But the young Kardashians are portrayed on that show as well. They watch this trial happen. They see their father's fame. They see what it does around them. They hear his name on TV. And the show certainly suggests that there becomes this desire for it, or this appreciation for it. But it's not just the Kardashians. Mark Furman, the kind of villain at the center of the trial, other than OJ, right? Mark Furman, who was reviled as a racist in the trial. A major part of the trial is his racisms and all the history of racism that he has done. And then, of course, he goes on to become a contributor at Fox News. Kato Kalin, called by Larry King, I believe, as the first reality star. Later is a reality star, appears on Celebrity Big Brother just because of his celebrity. I think he did okay. He was very entertaining. I'll tell you that much. I did watch. I think he made it pretty far. He didn't win.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a very likable sort, Kato Kalin. He really is a very likable sort. And it's just like there are characters like that who emerge from this trial and who emerge from this story as part of this obsession with everything that played out. So it's really fascinating when you think about like all these people and what might have happened if it hadn't gone down this way. In another dimension somewhere, O.J. Simpson did not do this, and another celebrity or football player did it, and it's an entirely different world that we live in because of the way it played out differently. This is just sort of like this horrible crux of Los Angeles and celebrity and true crime and the 24-hour news cycle and all of it. It's really, really bad.
Well, I think it's also sort of very, very reflective of it is this reality TV moment that almost feels like it has to be scripted, right? Like it feels like it's this moment where life just feels way too large for this to act like life doesn't feel large enough to fit the scope of what's happening with the Simpson trial and everything like that. And boy, has that not just become, more and more the case with every year that has worn
Oh yeah,
on.
we found a way to make it fit, right? By just like taking on more than we probably can. And so we just gobble it up. And soon it will overtake us. Soon we will all just be living in a reality show of someone else's filming if we're not doing it ourselves. But I mean, people are live streaming their daily lives. People are creating their own reality content at the user level at this point. So the insatiable lust for it that maybe was either discovered or certainly fed by the Simpson trial is rampant now. And I think will only continue in that direction.
Antonio, we put out the wombat signal that the weekend program was getting together. We alerted the masses, the AJ masses, that Antonio and Josh were
Shout out to
getting
AJ.
the band back together. Huge shouts to AJ Mass. Huge shouts to so many people who reached out, who were really excited to hear that
Yes.
you and I were going to be doing a weekly show. Tons of people. We want to be hearing from all of you all season long. And by season long, I mean for the rest of our lives, because we're not covering a season of TV anymore. So theoretically, Antonio, are we just here now? Do we just live here in the
We
attic
live here
now?
now.
Is
Yeah,
this,
we here for
that,
you.
that's one of the benefits, right? We're not just covering a show. So theoretically, we're just on, baby. It's just
That's right.
happening here.
We live in the attic. We here for you. Like I said, we're there.
We get Wi-Fi in the attic. One of the great ways that you could reach out to us, we have an email address, weekendprogram, rhap@gmail.com. If you want to write into us, weekendprogram, rhap@gmail.com. I don't know if it's going to be every single week, Antonio, that we will do this segment, but
It won't be.
in honor of the 90s, I'm going to call this segment
You've got mail.
That's pretty
because
good.
we did get mail. Your file's done, Antonio. We did get some mail today, not to our AOL account, not from an AOL account, but I thought a really fun one that could maybe enlighten some people on our takes on modern TV. This is from Toby. A king wrote in and said, if you were stranded on an island, and this
Oh, you love
island,
this right away.
I
You just
do
love this right away because you're being put on an island. It's not
love
the Lost Island.
I love a TV island. Toby says, if you were stranded on an island and this island somehow had Wi-Fi, however, the Wi-Fi was strictly earmarked for streaming TV. If you could only choose one streaming service provider to keep you entertained on the island, which one would you choose? Hashtag islands in the stream. Hashtag Wandoff. So I had to do a little Wanda there. Antonio, this is fun. I like this because I like that we already in this podcast shouted out the Queen's Messenger that has a plot line that feels like it could have just happened today, that it could be a show that's being made now. But I don't know that you could go back to the time of the Queen's Messenger and then ask them the question that Toby is asking us now and have that make any kind of sense whatsoever to the Queen's Messenger audience. So some things did change dramatically over the course
You
of the
have a
century.
phonograph. It can only play one aria. Which aria are you choosing?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I guess like this does sort of start getting into a bit of the question, Antonio, of the ways in which, so 94, we are not living in, in many ways, we're not living in anywhere even remotely close to the TV world we are living in now. 94 is like 10 years off from my beloved, lightly aforementioned Lost, which is when that premieres. So that's 20 years ago now. 10 years ago now, we're launching post-show recaps and presiding over an era that many call peak TV. And now many people think we are on the other side of that peak, where peak TV represented so many great shows. They're prestigious, they're smart. The comedies are dramatic. The dramatic shows are funny. The lines are getting blurred, and the quality is top notch. And now we seem to be on the other side of that, where there is this rising tide of cynicism towards television, I think, both from the consumer perspective, from the viewer's perspective, but certainly from the man on top. Man on top is pouring down buckets of sludge down the aggro crag and into our streaming services, Antonio. So even the question of choose your streamer, who's your champion, is sad to me. I don't want to be like Grandpa Old McTeevester, but I'm kind of
I don't
feeling
want you
like
to be that either.
I'm kind of feeling like Grandpa Old McTeevester. I don't know what this is. There's this button on my remote. I push it.
Those buttons are the worst, by the way. You just
Like, what
accidentally press
happens?
one and wreck your whole life.
And then I have to drive old TV McTeevester to the train station because he doesn't belong in my house.
He definitely belongs on a train, though.
He's supposed to be on a train that's
He's
just
the conductor, I
constantly
think.
in motion. So with all of that being said, Antonio, who's your streamer? I guess, like, is this a thing that you think about? Are we in that age of choose your billionaire? Like, I do think that that's sort of that's the culture now to some degree, and I think it's a fascinating place to be as we're talking about this period of TV, this TV history moment in the making that I don't think yet has a consensus name behind it.
So we're not calling it the streaming era as a collective?
I think the streaming era is probably the closest that you get. I think there are people who still want to just like, peak TV. It rhymed. It was catchy. It was quick.
How
I think
about
the
like
streaming era is like very fitting with the golden era of TV and all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it is. I think more than anything, this era is being defined by the fact that content is being, as you said, like sludged down from above to fill out these streaming services that they've invested and thrown a lot of money into, that are almost all loss leaders at this point, or that are not performing financially to the benefit of these people. They're sort of building out the foundation so that Paramount Plus, for example, will have enough content to legitimize itself as a streamer. And I shouldn't say that in a negative way, because Paramount Plus is among the ones that is near the top of the list for me. But it isn't down to scripted TV. So it's certainly an interesting question. Paramount has excellent reality content. They have all the Star Trek stuff on there, which I have not really dipped my toes into, but that a lot of people that I know that I respect a lot.
You're not a Trekman?
I'm not a Trekman.
I'm surprised by that, actually.
Yeah, my mom was a huge fan of the original series. I think Gene Roddenberry's like ethos and worldview, especially at the time, really do kind of dovetail with mine in a lot of massive and important ways. But I just never really was a Trek guy. But I know that content is on there. I know people love Deep Space Nine. I know they like the new stuff a lot. The old stuff is all on there. I think that has a lot to account for it. If you talk about like these legacy streamers where they do have this content that they made long ago that they can bring to their the streamer, it's hard to argue with Max on that front, right? Because not only do you have all of the it's not TV, it's HBO type shows,
but you also have Chow House.
You also have Chow House, which you love.
Props to Chow House. If you're not watching Chow House and you like the food competition shows, I think Chow House is secretly the best one.
I mean, it's wild. It takes place in Puglia, is that right?
It's Alex Cornicelli, some other dude who I don't know, and they have a bunch of people trapped in a house, sort of Big Brother style, and they compete in Top Chefy food competitions, and then the losing team has to vote out somebody, so it's got a little bit of a Survivor kick to it, and sometimes like the person who got voted out, they definitely just got voted out because like, I don't like you that much. You cooked great today, but you're done. Chow House rules. If you're looking for a show, might I suggest you're on We Know Scripted TV, Chow House.
Oh, it's scripted. Everything's scripted, Josh. Get woke. Open your eyes, brother. Abre las ojos.
Max has that. Max has all of the HBO, or at least all of the HBO that David Zaslav hasn't just gone.
Yeah,
like I did to my Knicks and Rangers friends. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
he just like euthanizing some of these shows, but that's even it. Is like I don't want to pledge loyalty to a streamer that's just going to take Westworld away from me. What if I want to go back and watch Kixuya? You know, what if I want to go back and check out some of these episodes? So my instinct also was Max because it's got your HBO stuff. It's got a lot of like the great sort of like like I think Friends is there or was there for a long time. So it's got like a lot of like popular hits, and it's got the travel and food stuff that I really love to watch as well when I'm not watching scripted TV. But I feel like it's so fickle, and is it going to be Max in a year from now? I don't know. Um,
The West Wing's on there right now. I know you spun through
sure.
that in the last year,
Max is
and
probably my most used streamer, followed not terribly far behind by Netflix, but a lot of the time I'm just like on Netflix looking at it. You know what I
same.
mean?
Right, yeah.
Just like
Pretty thumbnails.
like I've pulled up Netflix and I'm on there for like an hour looking at it. I'm like, I don't know what to put on. Literally no
So do you
idea.
think they should make their UI less cluttered, more targeted? Like, what's the improvement there? How does Max do it better?
Well, I think they want me streaming minutes, so I don't think they want me just like staring at their screen. But at least I spend a decent time on the amount of time on their app. I think it's the quality of the content, and I think the fact that you even say that about Netflix now versus where we were 10 years ago when you and I started podcasting about TV regularly, that's kind of insane. That like you talk about Netflix as a place where it's just like overstuffed. There's just too much stuff. Netflix was a real thought leader in the transformation into the peak TV
He's a real
era.
grace leader too.
Indeed.
Yeah,
But one of the things that I would say in there is that like I have a hesitation here to like be too cynical about the state of TV. And I think that there's a lot of reasons to be cynical about the state of TV. We are still within the same calendar year as we're still within 12 months of the Screen Actors Guild's strike. WGA was still on strike a year
man, if
ago.
you think that's the last work stoppage or work issue like this that will happen, you got another thing coming.
And on our watch for sure. You know,
Yeah,
I'm really inclined to think that we will be in similar situations again,
we
and
will.
should be in similar
Yeah,
situations again based on where certain pieces of technology are driving us at a clip that's just way too fast to be reasoned with. So the treatment of writers, the treatment of people who make this stuff, is a story that's very reflective of so many of the different ways that people are struggling in labor in today's day and age. With all of that being said, there's all of this like all this stuff that's just getting like gluttonously rolled up into like a ball and tossed down the hill, and the ball breaks up down the mountainside, and you get hit with whatever detritus you get hit with, and you didn't even know that that one had like multiple colors on it. I would have rather been hit by that ball. There's so much out there. There's just too much out there. But within that, I think that there are gems. I think that there are pieces of the mountain that crack apart, and you go over and you scoop up the innards of what just came down. And oh my God, that's Ripley. You know, these shows.
he hides in the most insane places. His disguise was incredible. He was a rock this time. Yeah,
Oh
he
my
Ripleyed a
God.
rock.
He
Yeah,
Ripleyed a rock. I can't
he
believe that.
Ripleyed. You should Ripley the Rock, although that would
He
be very difficult to pull off.
Ripleyed the rock. Shouts to get played. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting to me because there has never been more. There has never been more mediocrity. This is something that Grace and Taryn Armstrong talked about on the Tastemakers a bit earlier this week, and I've been thinking about it a lot too. Is that there's never been more mediocrity, but I think my thought underneath that is the quality of prestige TV, the quality of peak TV, the quality of that golden era of TV where Sopranos is happening, Lost is happening. Some of these shows, it's absolutely still here. It absolutely was here before the most recent golden age, and so on and so forth. I think to your point, Antonio, of how much this stuff just kind of it cycles and cycles, and we forget the cycle that came before that cycle, and so we go back to that one over and over again. So while we are in the streaming era, and while it is a lot, there are gems, Shogun, Ripley. There's just some Baby Reindeer. There's some TV that has happened this year alone, and this year is not even halfway done. That has been among the most exciting, work in this space that I've seen in my time covering it. So I'm not ready to call Uncle. I'm only ready to call Uncle Tonio, but I'm not ready to call Uncle when it comes to the topic of TV.
Nor am I, but as far as Toby's question goes, you hit on it for me, which is that Sopranos lives on Max, ergo, that is the choice.
Yeah.
If I could watch 100 shows, I would probably pick Max because I would say across the board, the 100 shows are going to be of a higher quality than the 100 that are on another streamer. If I could watch 50 shows, it's the same thing. But if I could only watch one show, I'm still picking Max because of
Yeah.
The Sopranos, because I could probably just watch that show endlessly. It in and of itself is a lot like about the generations that came before and their traditions and their history versus what the generations that were occupying the space coming up at the time that The Sopranos was airing were dealing with. So the crisscross between Gen X and Boomers and people that were holding on to things and not letting go, and people who weren't able to grab for themselves as a result. So much of that is baked into The Sopranos. You could watch it endlessly over and over, I think, and view it differently and have it mean something different to you at different stages of your life in the way that you can with good literature. It's The Sopranos for me. Ergo, it's Max for me. And it's really, honestly, once you include all the other things that are on Max, like we talked about, probably not even that huge of a debate. But yeah, for me, The Sopranos locks it in on Max. And if Sopranos were on Netflix, I would say Netflix.
Well, and maybe because HBO has licensed out some of their shows to Netflix,
Right.
whether it's 6 Feet Under or Band of Brothers or so on and so forth.
Sopranos
True
was on
Blood,
Prime for a while. Yeah.
so you never know. So I think that this is great. This is a great email that we got from Toby. We want to hear more. That's going to do it for
You've got mail.
this week, but we would love to do this one again. You can email us, of course. Weekend program, rhap@gmail.com is our feedback line. Weekend program, rhap@gmail.com. Antonio, we got a lot of people who wrote some really amazing stuff. And frankly, a couple of the comments were a little scary. It was like they looked at our notebook because we have a lot of future episodes already mapped out. And at least one of them touched on like a future mini series that we want to do, or we want to do like a month-long series on a couple of these topics. So we've got a lot that that's in the chamber, and we are going to only get more inspired when we hear from all of you. So again, that's weekend program, rhap@gmail.com. Antonio.
I love that. And you mentioned earlier, Josh, the fact that we will there are these rocks heading down the mountain, but every so often one of them breaks open and a gem pops out, and it's not Ripley having Ripleyed the rock or a rock. It is in fact a different show or a different thing. Next week on the weekend program here, we're going to be talking about one of our absolute favorites in the modern era, and it's a show that will be coming to a streamer near you, all dropped at once to much discussion, and certainly a topic I'm sure we'll be hitting on next week. Josh, that is The Bear.
The Bear. Some people are worried about dragons right now, Antonio. I am afeared of the bear.
Bears are real, for one. That's a scary thing. They'll get in
As
your
you
garbage.
get eaten off screen by a dragon for insulting the nature of their reality.
Bring it on, I say.
The Bear on FX on Hulu is coming at the end of June. One of the things that Antonio and I want to do from time to time is watch a show, announce that we are watching a show, give you plenty of time to catch up on the show so that some weeks down the line we can have a bigger, really in-depth conversation about the show. So our first flagship TV example is going to be The Bear. Next week's podcast, general conversation about the first 2 seasons of The Bear, what we love so much about the show, why we think it's a really important show, both in terms of its actual subject matter, but I would say it's a really great argument in this question that I think comes out of this streaming service loyalty question, Antonio, is are you loyal to the binge drop or do you like the weekly? And The Bear being a binge drop that I'm sure many people wish was just coming out weekly so we could talk about it all summer. I think there's a fascinating conversation to be had there. So we're going to have that conversation in addition to talking about Carmi. We're going to talk about Carmi.
that was a solid Richie. That was a solid
We're
Richie.
going to talk about Cousins.
Thank
We're going
you,
to talk
cousin.
about beef. We're going to talk about all of it.
I love that. I love The Bear. I rewatched it for maybe the 5th time recently, and it's still just as good as it ever was. It might be better than it ever was. The more you
I'm
really
on my
get
third
into it.
watch through right now, and it's the most
Yeah.
I've ever enjoyed it, and I've loved it both times I'd
Yep.
seen it previously. So
I've had
I'm pretty psyched.
I've had a different and growing appreciation for it every time I've spun through it, and it does watch. It's a very quick watch in most instances. So it's like it's an amphetamine. You really just kind of mainline that show, and it is designed that way, and it certainly hits in that way. So we're going to be talking about the Bear. Are we going to be talking about spoilers from the first 2 seasons, or do you just want to go broad brush?
Let's see where it goes. If there's going to be spoilers, we'll warn you at the start of the podcast for sure, and we will tell you where to get out if we get into a spoiler section. But we'll see. We'll dance that dance as we get to it. Make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss the dance. Go to robhasawebsite.com/scripted that has all of the subscriber info to get We Know Scripted TV on your podcast player of choice. That's robhasawebsite.com/scripted. Ratings and reviews so appreciated here at the start of this brand new podcast adventure. Huge shouts to all the people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible, including the aforementioned Jessica Mulch Sterling, my community building partner in crime from Once Upon a Time. Jess, bringing you in real quick. Jess, did we do okay on the first one?
That was great. I loved it.
Okay, we did all right on the first one. Jess said it was great. We loved it.
I didn't get to ask Jess a question.
Do you want me to bring Jess back? Do you want to ask her a
bring
question?
her back.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mulch, bringing you back in. Jess's self-declared nickname, Mulch. Mulch, Antonio has a question for you quick.
Jess, how do we do on the first one?
I loved it. Antonio, you specifically.
So she was cut off at that point because there was a blackout at her house.
It didn't look like I saw your hand move. It looked like you pressed a button.
Well, that's my secret cat. Hands
She was in the process of praising me. Why did you send her away?
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that piece. Make sure you send your praise for Antonio, myself, and everybody else involved at RHAP over to Weekend Program, rhap@gmail.com. Any questions you have about TV, we would love to field them over there. The Bear is what's coming next to the Weekend Program. Antonio, anything else?
No, I do. I'm just wondering, with the way that you've just so rapidly dismissing Jess, it feels like we've been podcasting for like 6 weeks at this point.
Yeah.
It feels very lived in.
Yeah, it feels lived in.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
So that's going to do it for the Weekend Program here at RHAP. We Know Scripted TV. We'll be back next week with The Bear. Until then, everybody take care. Bye-bye.